Greetings, folks. Welcome back to A City Full of History. My name is Dan Thurber. I am your voracious reader and history repeater, and today on the show we are at the Battery, the southernmost point of Manhattan Island, and the reason we're here is because it was from this very spot, in this very body of water, that on June 6th, 1896, two Norwegian fishermen set off on what would be one of the most epic and yet overlooked journeys in New York City history. Now, what makes the journey of George Harbo and Frank Samuelsen so unbelievable isn't that the two men crossed the Atlantic. No, it's the fact that they did it with nothing more than a few sets of oars, an 18-foot rowboat, and the strength of their backs. Today, on A City Full of History, we're diving in to the fantastic journey of the Fox. We're getting out of the library and onto the street. It really is a city full of history. You just have to go out and find it. George Harbo was born in Sandefjord, Norway in 1864. At 20 years old, he sailed for New York, looking to make his fortune in the New World, to make a good home for Anine, his bride-to-be. He had been a fisherman and studied with the Merchant Marine in Norway, so he was able to quickly find work as a harbor pilot in New York. Although the work paid well, it was dangerous, so Harbo elected to dig clams in Atlantic Highlands, along the New Jersey coastline, a popular place for Scandinavians to settle. Frank Samuelsen was born in Ilundi, Norway in 1870. By 1887, the 17-year-old Samuelsen was growing restless and left his family's farm seeking adventure. He joined the Merchant Marine and traveled the world for 6 years before arriving in New York in 1893. He too found work in Atlantic Highlands, digging clams, where he met and befriended George Harbo. In the summer of 1895, Harbo mentioned to Samuelsen an idea that he had, that if the two men could somehow row across the Atlantic Ocean, they could make a fortune later on the lecture circuit telling the tale. Samuelsen was originally hesitant, but eventually did agree to the trip, and the two men pooled their money for the purchase of supplies and a boat in which to make the journey. Working with shipmaker William Seaman, the two designed an 18-foot clinker, a wooden rowboat with an airtight compartment at either end for the housing of their supplies as well as for buoyancy. They had their boat, they had their supplies, now they just needed to get the word out. For this, the men approached Richard Fox, owner and editor of the National Police Gazette, a New York magazine known for printing salacious stories and promoting daredevil feats. Harbo and Samuelsen thought they might be able to get Fox to underwrite their expedition. Although he was intrigued, Fox declined to give the Norwegians any money, although he did agree to publicize their journey in exchange for naming the boat after him. The Fox, as their boat was now known, set out from the Battery at 5:30 in the evening on June 6, 1896, to shouts of both encouragement and derision from the crowd of thousands who had come to see them off. Their goal was the port city of Le Havre on the northwestern coast of France. The journey, as one might expect of a small rowboat trying to cross the ocean, was fraught with peril. The days were long, the labor intense, and the weather tumultuous. At several times, the men were able to flag down passing steamers and ask the captains to report their meeting to the newspapers, so their worried families would know they were okay. Over the next few weeks, Harbo and Samuelsen settled into their routine. Their legs were cramped, their hands and lips were cracked, but their spirits were good, and they were determined to make it to Le Havre. Then came the storm. The storm began on the morning of July 10th, their journey more than halfway complete. The seas started to break, and the rain got worse. The Fox had weathered more than her fair share of rough seas already, but this was different. Throughout the day, the storm got worse, until finally a wave like none they had so far encountered threw the men out of the boat and capsized the Fox. Lucky for Harbo and Samuelsen, their tether lines held, and they were able to swim back, right the small vessel, and get in. They had survived, but much of their provisions were gone. They carried on for 5 more days, rationing their remaining stores carefully, when they had a stroke of luck. By tying a towel to the end of one of their oars, they were able to flag down a passing steamer, the Clio, bound for England with a load of Canadian timber. By coincidence, the ship and her crew were also Norwegian, and happily resupplied their countrymen, proudly offering encouragement to the still determined rowers, and promising to report their meeting to the newspapers. 2 weeks later, on August 1st, 1896, George Harbo and Frank Samuelsen made landfall in the Scilly Islands just off the English coast. They had been at sea for 55 days, had rowed more than 3,500 miles, but they had made it. The first people to ever row across the Atlantic. On August 7th, they landed at A Havre, the end of their journey. Sadly, the fortunes of Harbo and Samuelsen just didn't improve quite the way they had hoped. They took the Fox on a lecture tour of Europe from 1896 into 1897, but the tickets just didn't sell the way they wanted. They returned to the States in March of 1897 and agreed to display the Fox at the Palace Museum, a dime museum up on Union Square at 14th Street, run by George Huber. Even with that, as well as the publicity from the National Police Gazette, their fortunes just didn't improve, and soon both men returned to digging clams. George Harbo would find work again as a ship's pilot in New York Harbor, his navigational feats aboard the Fox earning him the respect of the New York sailing community. He was able to bring his wife Anine over to the States, to a nice house in Brooklyn, where they would raise 9 children. One night, Harbo came home with chills and a high fever. After a brief battle, he passed away from pneumonia on April 4th, 1908, at only 44 years old. Frank Samuelsen left the sea. He returned to Norway, eventually taking over his family's farm in Elundi. Surviving both world wars, Frank Samuelsen passed away on June 6, 1946. He was 76 years old. Well, that's all I've got for you folks today. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed it. The story of Harbo and Samuelsen has fascinated me, so to be able to chat about it with you folks has been a real treat. Head on over to bookwormhistory.com to stay up to date on all of our latest content, videos, articles, podcasts, all of that jazz. I do hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for stopping by. Welcome to the end card, and a little segment I like to call Tidbits and Trivia. One of the things that first interested me in the story of Harbo and Samuelsen was that when they came back, they were on a really old, clunky steamer. It was on its way out the door, and they actually had such a horrible trip that they ran out of coal somewhere off the Massachusetts coast. The captain of the steamer ordered every wooden object to be thrown into the boilers to try and make good steam so they could reach port. Harbo and Samuelsen, on seeing that they were thinking about throwing the Fox into the boiler, said, no, hold my drink. Lowered into the water, they sailed to shore, got help, and came back and rescued the ship. Turns out there is zero evidence that this story is true. It actually never happened. They did have a terrible trip on the way back. They were on an old clinker of a ship, and they did have to stop off in Newfoundland to pick up more fuel, but they knew it ahead of time. So the story that they did this amazing epic thing on the way back as well just isn't true. It's just a little bit of the spice of the local folklore.